Hi there, I'm Chris Novelli from N3 Architecture, and I'd like to take you through a new series of videos that I'm going to be working on that will be documenting the design of a new custom modern residence. Now, design is a multi-phase, multi-step process, and it's cyclical, and it's iterative. It's not linear. And these videos, the series of videos, it's going to be presented in a step-by-step basis in a linear fashion, but really design is an iterative cyclical process. So what you are working on now will inform what you're working on in a month, but then what you work on a month from now will go back and modify some of the assumptions that you made at the beginning. There's always going back and revisiting things that you thought at the beginning of a project that is turning out to be different or maybe enhanced as the design evolves. And so I just thought I'd take you along on that journey. So this first video in the series is going to be all about the site analysis. When I first start evaluating a site for a new custom home, I want to evaluate both the constraints and opportunities of the site as well as the environmental conditions. And the environmental conditions that I'm talking about consist of solar orientation, prevailing winds in both the summer and the winter. It thinks about topography and vegetation and where are the views, how the site is approached, and a number of other different factors. And when I start to analyze a site, I want to start to get a vision of what it's going to be like to be there in the morning versus the night, in the winter versus the summer. I want to understand what the views into the site are, what people are going to see when they walk past or drive past. I want to understand what the views out of the site are. What will the people that are living there look at as they're sitting in their living room or their bedroom or their kitchen? I want to identify areas on the site that can be used for recreation. I want to identify places where I want to block views. And really, through the site analysis, ideally, what you want to try to capture is the essence of the site. What makes that particular spot, that particular site special or different? And how can those qualities be used to inform your design? And so this is not making any decisions at this point. This is just an observation of what is there and going through a diagramming phase where I create drawings that help me understand all of these different criteria. And sometimes this is easy and sometimes this is difficult. You know, you have an easy site where it has these amazing lake or waterfront views or mountain views, or maybe it's a property that's been owned by a family for multiple generations and there's a story behind it, a backstory of how that family used that place and how that memory can be kept alive. An example of this is I'm currently working on the design of a new custom home where the family has owned the property for a long time, and my client used to play in the woods as a child, and there was this big rock that they used to climb and play on, and we're designing the house sort of in relationship to that rock, so she has those memories of what it was like to be in that place as a child. And now her children can experience the same thing. Capturing these moments will elevate how special a place really is. And that can be used to inform the design of the house. What you don't want is just to plunk a house down anywhere. Any old design, any old location. No, you want there to be a meaning behind everything. You want it to tell a story. You want it to capture that essence, both in the site and the house that's going to be built there. And you want those two things to work together. So site analysis is a really important, critical first step. And you know, sometimes you get a project where the site isn't special at all. It's just a plain lot with neighbors on either side, and maybe houses across the street, and maybe it backs up to some woods, or maybe it backs up to another row of houses that are on the opposite side, so the two yards connect. And those sort of sites can tell a story too. Those sort of sites tell more of a collective story about a neighborhood or a region, and those can also be used to inform the design. Okay, so this particular site that we're going to be working with on this project, it's located in a suburb in central Massachusetts, and it's a little bit unique for the other neighborhoods in this particular town, as Most of the neighborhoods in the town are set up pretty standard as a normal subdivision would be. But this one, there's actually like a loop road that goes around this little pond. And then off of that loop road, there's these shared driveways, or these shared roads, really. They're kind of larger than driveways, that terminate in a cul-de-sac. And off of that cul-de-sac, there's 3 or 4 houses that are set back off the street. And then you have 3 or 4 of these little groupings of these houses off of these sort of side streets, cul-de-sacs. And the site that we're working with is one of the last to be developed in this neighborhood. And there's a steep pitch that kind of comes up from the road back to the back of the site. And it has these sort of rolling hills. And the driveway will come off of this cul-de-sac area. And you can see that most of the site is open. There's some views to the main road down below. And then around these pine trees, you have a view of the pond. Instantly, I'm thinking of what spaces can be used in the house to capture that view of the pond. Because that's going to be a primary view, not just the views from the house, but the views to the house. It's going to be pretty important, that front primary area. And then this is kind of cool. Around the pond, there's this walking path that the neighborhood can use, and you can get some exercise, or you can walk your dogs, or you can go with your kids, or you can take your grandkids down to the pond and do some fishing in the summer, or some ice skating in the winter. And it's a really nice little quiet neighborhood. So one of the first things that I'm going to do when I work on a new project, if there's no survey yet, which I always talk about the importance of getting a survey, but one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to go onto the city's GIS system, and I'm going to find the property, and I'm going to import the GIS map into my design software. And I'm going to start off by just making a rough sketch of the property lines and making sure that it's scaled to the right scale. You can see I can use the scale from the GIS map and rescale the drawing. And you can see our site here is lot 13. It's just under an acre, and it's looped around this ring road. And so what I'm going to do is just draw out the property lines, and that will be the basis of my site analysis work, which I like to do by hand rather than on the computer, because I like the free-flowing nature of how you think about with your hand while you're sketching. Making sure the site plan is to scale is critical, because you don't want to start drawing something and have it be out of scale and figure out that what you're drawing, what you're sketching in your analysis phase just isn't going to work. So I'm going to create a little graphic scale here that will be on the printouts that I'll use for my site analysis, and this will just sort of keep me in line. Now, this is not perfect, right? It's a GIS map, it's not an actual survey, but for the analysis phase, it's close enough. Then I like to throw that little site plan onto a sheet and print it out, and that way I know everything's to scale as I start to draw. So the first step once I start working by hand is I'm going to draw out the property lines. And then I'm going to look at the zoning code for the setbacks, and I'm going to make sure that I have the setbacks noted. And here there's a 15-foot side yard setback and a 20-foot front yard setback. And I'm going to draw out sort of the roads and the adjacent property lines. And now what I'm going to try to do is locate this ring road. So I know from the GIS map that there's this fire hydrant that's located right there at that corner, which is just about there in the plan. And so I'm just going to make a notation of where that fire hydrant is. And then from there, from the aerial view, I can locate that fire hydrant, and then I can start to put in these trees that I can see from the aerial view. And once I locate these trees, that will help me to locate the approximate location on where that access road is. And so, this may not be 100% exact, and that's fine, because this is just the analysis phase. We're just looking at what are the site constraints and opportunities, and we're trying to get a better understanding of the place that we're going to be designing for. And so now the way that cul-de-sac interacts with the property line may not be exactly like that, but again, it's close enough. So we're just going to go ahead and lock that in on the sketch. Next, I'm going to add in the other vegetation that I can see from my site visit and then from the aerial photography. It's a pretty open site. I don't know if it was originally used as farmlands maybe, but it has these sparse trees on there that, you know, aren't really that important. They're not really nice specimen trees, but we do have this dense wooded area just off the property line, and that's going to be critical, I think, in maintaining a sense of privacy. And then you'll see later on how that can affect the environmental conditions. So I'm going to make sure I note that dense area of vegetation, because that's going to be very important to how I orientate the house. And then there's also some nicer trees down by the corner of the property, sort of on the adjacent property, and then across the street where that pond is, there's some trees that are there that I know I'm not going to be able to touch. Those are going to have to stay there because they're not on our property. And there's that grove of pine trees that block the view or frame the view of the water. And I know that the access to that sidewalk that goes around the path lines up pretty much exactly with that cul-de-sac access road. And then the walking path sort of circles around like that. So I'm going to note that and fill in the vegetation. And again, that walking path is going to be such a good site feature that the family that's going to be living there will be able to use. They'll be able to take their kids and their grandkids down there, and they'll be able to go and walk around and exercise and just enjoy that pond. And having that right across from your property with that walking path or directly accessed from that cul-de-sac road, that's great. And so we want to keep that in mind. We want to keep in mind that the pond is right across there, and that we're going to have views down of the pond. Now, one thing, we have this busy road that's off to the side, and while the neighborhood is pretty private, there is this moment from the main busy street where people driving or walking by are going to have these large views sort of across this adjacent property that's undeveloped into our site. Now, that property may get developed at one point, but it's not for now. And so I need to take that into consideration, because whatever I design will be able to be seen from the road. So I want to make sure that, you know, number one, it's the people are looking at something nice, and number two, that whatever program pieces, meaning the bedrooms, living rooms, bathroom, that sort of stuff, I don't want to locate those spaces where people are going to have a view into those spaces. So next is the topography, and like I was saying before, it's a pretty steep site in terms of topography. There's about a 15 or a 20 foot elevation change from the front of the site to approximately the midpoint back, at which point it levels off a little bit. So I want to make sure that it's at least noted that in this area there's this steep grade, and I probably won't be building in that area, or maybe I can take the opportunity and build into the hill. I mean, these are things that are going to be explored at a later date. But again, right now, I'm just sort of thinking of the possibilities. And also there's this depression in the grade where the grade sort of comes down around it, and that's also going to be something that needs to be considered, because that's naturally where the water is going to want to drain to. And I can sort of work with that on my site, but I can't change the grade on the adjacent site. So it's something that needs to be considered. And again, in the back, it's a pretty level site. Once you get in the back, that could be a nice area for the family to gather or kids to play. It could be an area for a pool or outdoor recreation. And then you have these pond views from the site, through the trees, through the grove of pine trees on the opposite side of the road, and to that pond. And this pond view is one of the important characteristics that's going to make this site a special place to be. The next thing I'm going to do is locate the approximate spot where I think the driveway into the property is going to be. And this is based upon just looking at the other sites, the other houses in the neighborhood. They all sort of come off at this sort of 3/4 point into the cul-de-sac. That might be a good opportunity to bring in vehicular access, because you don't really necessarily want your vehicles to be entering at a steep grade, again, unless I cut into that hill, which is completely possible. And so I'm locating this spot right here just as a preliminary ideal spot to locate the house. You got plenty of width, you got the flat area to the back, you got the sloping land to the front that you can take advantage of, and then you got the good driveway access. So this is a first pass of a site analysis. Again, just noting the things that come to mind as I'm drawing out the site. The next thing I'm going to do is look at the solar analysis. So again, I'm going to take that site plan that I drew, I'm going to put a solar diagram on top of it, and I'm going to print that out. I'm going to use that to create the preliminary solar analysis. I had sketched out the vegetation in that first drawing, so I'm going to take another piece of trace and lay it over that and use that as a guide to quickly lay down those conditions. So I'm going to sketch out the roads, and I'm going to sketch out the property lines. And since the information from the other drawing is not the primary focus of this drawing, this solar analysis, I'm using a thinner pen which will de-emphasize this sort of background information. And from there I can take my solar analysis, which I placed over the site and printed out, and I can take the sketch of the site and put that right on top. There are a few different resources I use to gain that solar information. There's a few websites that you can get it from. There's also an app for your phone, the Sunseeker app, which I really love because that will not only give you the solar diagram, but if you're actually on site, you can take your phone and hold it up and you can see exactly where the sun will be in the sky during the different times of the year. And so when looking at a solar diagram, the large circle around the outside, consider that to be almost like a giant dome over your site. And the other markings is where the sun will track along that dome at different times during the year. The arc that's closest to the center represents the sun path on June 21st. And so that's when the sun's going to be at the highest in the sky, or the highest on that sort of imaginary dome that's over the site, as you see in the analysis. And then the arc that's at the bottom is the path of the sun on December 21st, so that when it's at its lowest point, and you have your north, your south, your east, and your west coordinates. From there, you can identify the location of the sun at the different points of the day at those two extremes, the June 21st and the December 21st. I usually like to draw my diagram in 2-hour increments so you can see from sunrise to sunset where exactly the sun is, and then just note the path between. So we have here June 21st as the arc closest to the center, and then December 21st as the arc closest to the edge. Essentially what you're looking at is, pretend if you laid on your back and you looked up at the sky. Anywhere in between those two arcs is where the sun will be throughout the entire year. So if you're laying on your back and it's June 21st, that's going to be the sun at the highest point. So you can imagine laying on your back and your sun's right there. And on December 21st, you can lay on your back and the sun will be right there. And so you can look at that diagram and hopefully get an understanding of where the sun will be. And then also on that solar diagram, the angles of the sun is listed. And those angles are going to be critical when I start to design the window locations, the roof overhangs, and any other projection that's going to allow winter sun into the space to warm up the house and to block summer sun out. Next is locating the prevailing winds. And so you have prevailing winds in different directions in different seasons. So in the summer, in this area of the country, the prevailing winds come in from the southwest. And in the winter, they primarily come in from the northwest. And so what I'm thinking of here is, what sort of spaces can I locate that will capture those summer prevailing winds and naturally cool the house, or have a natural ventilation, or even spaces that can be used as outdoor spaces to get those summer breezes. And then in the winter, I'm thinking about what can I do on the site, whether it's architecture related or landscape related, what can I do to block those winter winds? Then we also have, from the northeast, we have the nor'easters, which are big winter storms. And so those would generally come in from the northeast. A little pro sketching tip here: whenever you're working with trace paper and you want to add color to your drawing, Always flip the trace paper over and color on the back. This not only prevents your lines from being smudged, but it also will just look a lot better. Sometimes I use colored pencil to add color. Sometimes I use markers. And here I want to differentiate the nor'easter location where we want to block those storms. And so I'm using a different color on that. And earlier I talked about that dense area of vegetation that's to that side of the site. And this is going to be great because it provides a natural buffer for those nor'easter storms. So there's very little that I'm going to have to do with the house to prevent those northeast winds during those nor'easter storms from making the house uncomfortable. I still might want to put buffer spaces there, or spaces that don't have a lot of windows in that area, and that's just something that's going to evolve over time. Next, I want to identify this main road, and I know that while it's not a super busy road, there will be traffic on that road and there will be noise. So I want to identify where that noise is coming from, because when we're designing a custom home, we don't really want to have the result be that you have your most private spaces in the most noisy locations. So right here I want to identify, this is where the noise is coming from. This is sort of where the sound waves are going to be projecting out from. And I want to make sure that that gets taken into consideration as we design. And I usually just like to throw a little bit of color on those sound waves just so that they stand out. These environmental diagrams will give me a good guide to go by as I start to work on the preliminary layouts. I do want to show some vegetation on this diagram because the existing trees down by the corner is going to block some of that noise from the main road, and we'll just add a little bit of color here to this vegetation, just enough to make it stand out. And there we have the final environmental condition analysis diagram showing solar orientation, prevailing winds, the location of noises, the location of vegetation, all things that are critical as I go work into the next steps. So that's it for my initial site analysis. You'll notice that no decisions were made, no outcomes were expressed. This is just an observation and a documentation of those existing site conditions. And so as I'm sketching those out, I'm thinking in my mind of the possibilities, but then as I go forward into the next step, I'm going to start exploring those possibilities further with conceptual diagrams. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.